Two men, Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were given the honor of guiding it. Can you imagine the pride they must have felt? They were at the very center of this historic, joyous event, responsible for the most sacred object in their nation. The music swells, the crowd cheers, and everything feels perfect. But then, something happens. As they travel, they come to a place called the threshing floor of Nacon. The ground is uneven, and the oxen stumble. The cart lurches violently, and for a terrifying second, it looks like the ark is going to topple over and crash to the ground. In that split second, instinct takes over for Uzzah without a thought. He reaches out his hand to steady the ark. It was a natural human reaction, right? He was trying to protect it, to save it from falling. He was trying to help, and in that instant, he fell dead. The music screeches to a halt, the cheering stops. A wave of stunned silence, and then a ripple of fear sweeps through the crowd. One moment, Uzzah was a hero of the parade. The next, he lay lifeless on the ground beside the ark he tried to save. What just happened? Why would God strike down a man who was seemingly doing a good thing? It's a question that has puzzled people for centuries. It feels harsh, unfair even. To understand this shocking event, we need to rewind a bit and understand what the Ark of the Covenant actually was. This wasn't just a fancy box. The Bible describes it as the physical throne of the invisible God on earth. Inside were the stone tablets with the 10 Commandments, a pot of manna, and Aaron's staff that had budded all symbols of God's covenant, provision, and power. It was the most sacred object in all of Israel. It represented God's holy, pure, and powerful presence among his people. Because of its extreme holiness, God had given very specific, very clear instructions on how it was to be handled. In the book of Numbers, God commanded that the ark was to be carried only by the Levites, a specific tribe set apart for holy service. And even they couldn't touch it directly. They were to carry it using long poles inserted through rings on the sides of the ark. These rules weren't arbitrary. They were designed to teach a crucial lesson about the nature of God. He is holy, separate, and unapproachable in our own strength or on our own terms. Touching the ark was explicitly forbidden on pain of death. Instead of following God's specific instructions for his people, they were borrowing from the culture around them. In his mind, his human effort was needed to save the symbol of God's presence. He thought his unclean hand could stabilize the throne of the perfectly holy, all-powerful God. It was a tragic misunderstanding of who God is. God doesn't need our help to maintain his holiness. He requires our obedience to honor it. The reaction of King David is telling. He wasn't just sad, he was angry and afraid. He was so shaken that he stopped the entire procession. He said, "How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" He realized he had approached God with celebration, but without the required reverence and obedience. He abandoned his plan and had the ark taken to the nearby house of a man named Obed-Edom. This is where the story takes another fascinating turn. The ark stayed with Obed-Edom for 3 months. And what happened during that time? The Bible says the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his entire household. There was no death, no fearingly immense blessing. Why the difference? Because Obed-Edom, likely a Levite himself, understood the principle of reverence. He housed the presence of God on God's terms, not his own. The news of this blessing reached King David, and it taught him the lesson he needed to learn. David realized that God's presence isn't something to be feared and avoided, but it must be approached correctly. So he prepared for a second attempt to bring the ark to Jerusalem. This time, he did it right. He carefully studied the law. He had the Levites sanctify themselves. They carried the ark on their shoulders using the poles, exactly as God had commanded. And what happened this time? The journey was a success. There was sacrifice, worship, and even more joyful celebration than before. But this time, the joy was rooted in obedience. The story of Uzzah is a sobering and powerful lesson. It teaches us that good intentions are not enough. We can't approach a holy God on our own terms, with our own methods, no matter how sincere we think we are. His holiness is absolute. Think of it like a massive electrical power station. The power inside is incredible. It can light up an entire city. But if you ignore the warning signs and touch a live transformer, the result will be instant and catastrophic. It's not because the power is evil. It's because it's powerful and operates by fixed laws. God's holiness is infinitely more powerful. This story forces us to ask ourselves, how do we approach God? Do we treat him casually, trying to fit him into our own comfortable, convenient boxes? Do we rely on our own good intentions and human efforts, thinking we can help God out? Or do we approach him with reverence, humility, and a deep desire to understand and obey his word? The death of Uzzah wasn't an act of a capricious, angry God. It was a severe public lesson for an entire nation and for us. It was a demonstration that God's holiness is not to be trifled with. It re-established the necessary awe and reverence that had been lost. Without that reverence, our worship becomes hollow and our relationship with God becomes superficial. But the story doesn't end with fear. It leads to the blessing of Obed-Edom and the successful, joyous entry of the ark into Jerusalem. It shows that when we honor God's holiness and follow his ways, his presence brings not death, but life, blessing, and unspeakable joy. The contrast is stark and intentional. Disobedience, even when well-meaning, leads to disaster. Obedience, rooted in reverence, leads to blessing. For us today, the Ark of the Covenant is no longer the center of our worship. The book of Hebrews in the New Testament tells us that Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of what the Ark represented. He is the very presence of God among us, but the principle of holiness remains. We are called to approach God with reverence and awe, not with a crippling fear that keeps us away, but with a respectful honor that acknowledges who He is. David learned this lesson the hard way. He went from fear and anger to a deeper, more mature joy rooted in obedience. So, the next time you think about your relationship with God, remember Uzzah, remember the celebration that turned to tragedy, and remember the vital lesson it teaches. God is holy. He is worthy of our utmost respect and our heartfelt obedience. And it is only when we approach Him on His terms, with reverence and awe, that we can truly experience the fullness of His blessing and joy. Thank you so much for watching. If this story made you think, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into fascinating stories from the Bible. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.